Hey guys, so today I want to talk to you about stress, and most importantly I want to talk about how stress influences your hormone state. Because there's a really big myth and a bit of a misunderstanding about the links between stress and how stress actually does affect hormones, especially in women. So before we get into that, what we need to understand is that what stress actually is. And stress really isn't actually what many people think it is. So most people relate stress to, hey, I've had a tough day at work, I'm struggling, I'm anxious, I'm really wound up, these type of things. It's really not stress. That's what we're talking about is emotional distress, which is very, very different than stress itself. When we're talking about stress, what we're really talking about is a survival mechanism, and a survival mechanism that's kicking in to keep you alive. So this is what happens if you were to be out in the wild and a lion starts chasing you. This is stress. The other side of that, when the lion leaves you, is an anxiety or an emotional response to that stress, which is often what we perceive as being stress. But that's actually not what stress is. So generally when we're talking about stress, we're talking about a flight or fight response, and with that flight or fight response becomes a hormonal shift as well to wind the mechanism up. And there's two key hormones that play a role in that mechanism. So the first one is a hormone called cortisol. So cortisol is a really awesome hormone in the sense it has a very broad effect on the human body. So there's very, very few tissues in the body, or very, very few structures in the body that aren't going to be influenced by cortisol. Maybe the cornea of your eye and maybe cartilage may not be influenced by it, but there's still other ways that it could be influenced by it. So it's pretty much affecting a single part of the human body. So a few key things that we see. So the first one is that it's actually proteolytic, so it breaks down tissue. It actually degrades tissue in the human body, and we need that simply because of the other reason, and that is that it increases blood glucose levels. So if you haven't eaten for 6-7 hours, you think, hey, my glucose levels are going to drop and therefore I'm going to starve. But what actually happens is cortisol levels come up and they activate a process called gluconeogenesis that actually increases your blood sugar in order to stabilize your system. So in order to do that, it needs to be able to free up stored tissue and stored energy and things like protein and stuff like that in the body. The downside of that, it also means it will break tissues down over a long period of time and cause degradation. It also alters our immune system and our brain health. With the immune system in two ways. So in some ways it can push the immune system up and increase the rate of autoimmune disease, and when it comes to upper respiratory stuff, it actually suppresses our immunoglobulin levels, and the result of that is predisposes us to upper respiratory infection. Is a common reason why people get recurrent upper respiratory infections. The other key one that most people forget about is it increases our arousal rate and our energy levels. So one of the key signs of stress that most people will start suffering with, even if they don't have any physical symptoms as such, is they being able to get to sleep at night. So insomnia is a key marker of brain arousal. It's a sign the brain is not winding down. And we spoke about this a little while ago when we talked about vagal tone and ways that you can change this and calm this down. So having problems getting to sleep and staying asleep at night can also be an arousal problem, which can also be part of cortisol. And remember, if you're freeing up glucose and getting glucose more available, you're also changing energy stores within the human body as well to make it easier for you to survive, which is exactly what you'd want if you're trying to escape from a predator. So that's a key hormone number one, cortisol. The other key one is DHEA, and DHEA is really important because it's kind of the building blocks that allows you to build all of these steroidal hormones. So DHEA is kind of like a stepping stone to your reproductive hormones as such, and it's most commonly known as our anti-aging hormone. In fact, there was a little while back, there was a lot of people running around anti-aging clinics injecting people with DHEA thinking they'd discover the fountain of youth. So it's a really, really important hormone as well. And what we understand is that both of these need to be kept in a key ratio in order for good health to exist. Too high or too low levels of either can be potentially problematic. So we look at the cascade of where this comes from, and I've oversimplified this a little bit for you guys to make it easy. But all this stuff is derived from an original source of a hormone that's produced in your adrenal glands called pregnenolone. And pregnenolone has a certain amount that is stored up that we then use to produce all of our other steroidal-based hormones from. So the three key ones it breaks down to are progesterone, cortisol and DHEA. So we've already spoken about these two. Progesterone, as the name says, is progestation. So this is the main hormone that maintains pregnancy. But it does a whole lot of other things rather than just lengthen your cycles out and lighten your cycles. Progesterone is also very important for brain health, especially in women. It's really important in sensitizing receptors for serotonin and helping right brain function. We commonly see low progesterone in people who suffer with anxiety on a frequent basis. DHEA then is broken down into two things. The first is estrogen and the second is testosterone. So most people understand testosterone as the male hormone, the masculine hormone, and estrogen being your fertile hormone, femininity, and to an extent that's somewhat correct. But both men and women have levels of these, just at varying degrees, and various receptors to them as well. So how does stress influence this? Well, the problem we have is that there's only so much pregnenolone to go around. There's not a lot of pregnenolone available for everyone to use for everything. So it has to create a priority. So normally what we have, especially in women, we have this cyclical fashion of hormones shifting throughout your cycles, and there's an increased demand for estrogen and progesterone at different levels with that, which allows kind of times where we have high levels of pregnenolone use and lower levels of pregnenolone use. When we start getting stressed though, our cortisol levels start to rise and we start prioritizing this pathway. And as we start prioritizing this pathway, the result of having that pathway prioritized, if it's going for a long period of time, is we start reducing the availability of pregnenolone. So now the body's going to have to decide who gets the store. We start developing this fight about who owns it. And this is what we call a pregnenolone steal. So as we start having this increased demand for cortisol, generally what happens for most people is progesterone levels will initially start to drop, and then as the system gets more significant, your DHEA levels drop as well. Now the key thing with this is cortisol will also tend to push estrogen into an elevated state. So these are the two that tend to have our priority in this regard. Then as we keep pushing and pushing, pregnenolone stores drop even further. Now there isn't enough pregnenolone to even provide enough for cortisol, so this level starts dropping as well, and now we start seeing a drop in estrogen and a drop in testosterone along the way. For men, sometimes this happens a little bit earlier, where even in the first early stages we get this shift from testosterone across to estrogen, but the result of this for everyone is exactly the same. Cortisol changes often lead to fatigue, they lead to brain changes, they lead to blood glucose changes. Estrogen elevation stimulates the limbic system and leads to a higher emotional state, and women will often lead to teariness. The lower level of testosterone really does affect male brain health and the ability for the men to regulate their nervous system, so they tend to crash, they get anxiety, depressed, motivational problems, all these kind of things as testosterone levels drop, as well as energy drops and everything. Where lower progesterone in women tends to shorten their cycle a little bit, or shorten their period a little bit, and also tends to often create period pain in women as well. So as you can see, all of that is derived because of changes in these two guys here, which is a direct result from stress. So as you can see, stress has a really profound effect on every aspect of human existence, and this is just one little insight and a very simplified, almost perhaps oversimplified approach to just give you an idea of how it affects your hormones, how it can affect your cycles as a female, and also how it can affect your energy and your brain health as a male as well. So anyway guys, I'm going to look a little bit more in depth into cortisol and into these hormones as we head over the next few weeks. If you have any questions as we go, just post them up, or otherwise send me a message. Always happy to help in any way, shape or form that I can. Remember, it's all about adding life to your years. Catch you next vid, guys.